In response to the Boston Tea Party, the British Parliament passed the Intolerable Acts. The Intolerable Acts went a long way to destroy the legitimacy of imperial governments throughout the colonies, and opposition to the Intolerable Acts begins to spread throughout the colonies. Most notably in Massachusetts, where they passed the Suffolk Resolves, which call upon the people to refuse obedience to these new laws, to withhold their taxes from the royal governments, and finally to prepare for war against the British. It's in this backdrop that the First Continental Congress meets in September of 1774. Prominent political leaders from 12 of the 13 colonies meet to discuss what to do about the Intolerable Acts. The feeling of unity that comes out of the First Continental Congress can best be described by Patrick Henry when he said, "The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian, but an American." The most important thing to come out of the First Continental Congress was the Continental Association, which was a complete boycott of British goods, an organized boycott of British goods. It also encouraged domestic manufacturing within the colony, since they would no longer be importing British manufactured goods. It denounced extravagant British goods. And finally, it set up committees of safety for each colony to make sure that the boycott was being upheld. These committees of safety did use intimidation, such as tarring and feathering, to make sure that the boycott was upheld. But they also played an important role because you begin to see a shift of power away from the royal governments and towards these new grassroots organizations in the colonies. And when this happens, people who had previously not participated in politics begin to participate, such as small farmers, city artisans, and propertyless laborers. On the night of April 19, 1775, the first shots of the Revolution are fired in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts. This is a picture of the Lexington Green. Here you see the famous North Bridge in Concord, Massachusetts, where the Minutemen and the British squared off, and what Ralph Waldo Emerson famously said was the shot heard round the world.
By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world.
Extra credit to who can tell me was just reading that. It's a month after that occurs, a month after Lexington and Concord, that the Second Continental Congress meets in May of 1775. There they agree to raise an army and print money to pay for it. They also make a political decision to put George Washington in charge of the army. This was a idea that was brought forth by John Adams of Massachusetts, who thought it was important to unite the North and the South colonies against the British. So the idea was they would put a Southerner in charge of the Continental Army. That Southerner, of course, was George Washington. They still have not decided to declare their independence. As a matter of fact, even though they've raised an army to fight the King's army, they send the king the olive branch petition in July of 1775, which declares that their loyalty and obedience to the king and asks for a permanent reconciliation. The king refuses the olive branch petition and instead proclaims that the colonies are in fact in official rebellion against the king. Events are going to occur that are going to push the colonies towards independence. One was Lord Dunmore's proclamation. Lord Dunmore was the royal governor of Virginia, who declared that any slave who came to fight on the side of the British would be given his freedom at the end of the war. They also, British burned Falmouth, Maine, which is today Portland, Maine. And then finally, a very influential pamphlet is going to be passed throughout the colonies. And this was a pamphlet that was written by a recent immigrant, Thomas Paine. His pamphlet was Common Sense. And the ideas that Thomas Paine wrote in Common Sense were not new ideas. The revolutionary thing about Common Sense was that it was written for the common man. It was written so that it was written for mass consumption. So these ideas were old ideas, but they were written in a way that common people would be able to understand. On July 2nd, the Continental Congress votes for independence, and on July 4th, they sign the Declaration of Independence.